Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got the halfway mark standings. We're going to look at each and every single team at the 41 game mark, see who would make the playoffs, who would miss the playoffs, and see some historical stats from over the past couple of years. We'll touch on all these things and who I would see going to the Stanley Cup final right now, coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all your support. I would never be able to do it with all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And don't forget to stay tuned for my videos coming out in the very near future. So in today's video, we've got the halfway mark standings. So we've done this over the past couple of years. We take all the teams who hit the 41 game mark, the records at the 41 game mark, put them into the standings, see who would make the playoffs, who wouldn't, some historical stats, and who I would currently have going to the postseason. So we're going to start off with the Eastern Conference and look at how the standings shaped out in the Eastern Conference. So the top three teams in the Atlantic Division in the East would be Tampa, who hit the 41 game mark at 53 points, Detroit, who hit it at 51 points, and Montreal, who hit it at 50 points. And the top three teams in the Metro would be the Canes, who hit it at 51 points, the Flyers, who hit it at 51 points, and the Penguins, who hit it at 49 points. Now, if we look at the two wildcard teams, those would be the New York Islanders and the Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres would be the team who's actually ahead of the New York Islanders, but those would be the two wildcard teams, as both have 48 points. And then the teams on the outside looking in at the halfway point would be the Florida Panthers and Washington Capitals, who both have 47, the 46-point New Jersey Devils, the 45-point Leafs and Sens, the 44-point Bruins, and the 43-point Rangers and Blue Jackets. So very interesting out there. Like, I could see one or two teams wind up swapping, but those teams all seem to be doing really good right now who are in a playoff spot. So very interesting out there. Those would be the 8 teams in the East who make the playoffs. In the Western Conference, the Colorado Avalanche with 69 points, Dallas Stars with 57 points, and Minnesota Wild with 55 points would be the top 3 teams in the Central Division. And in the Pacific Division, you wouldn't have a 50-point team in the Pacific Division. This is the first time since the divisions realigned back in 13-14 that there hasn't been a team from a division, at least one team, who's hit 50 points at the halfway point. The Golden Knights had the lead at this point at the halfway point with 48 points in 41 games. They're followed by Seattle, who has 47, and Edmonton, who has 46. So once again, that Pacific Division is crowded and not overly good, given the fact they don't even have one 50-point team. So very interesting note there. The two wildcard teams would be the Ducks and the Kings, both having 45 points. Ducks would have the edge tiebreaker-wise for the first wildcard spot, but those two would be the two wildcard teams. Then the teams who are just on the outside looking in would be the San Jose Sharks, who have 43 points, the Nashville Predators, who have 42 points, Utah, who has 41, Calgary, who has 40, Chicago, who has 39, St. Louis, who has 38, Vancouver, has 37, and Winnipeg, who has 35. So very interesting note there. Once again, I could see a couple of teams swap out. So very interesting note there. Now, if I look at just a couple of stats from over the past 5 years. So from the 2020-2021 season to the 24-25 season, there have been 80 teams who have made the playoffs. Of course, 16 times 5 is 80. Of those 80 teams who are in a playoff spot at the halfway point, 71 made the playoffs. That's about an 88% chance. Only 9 teams who weren't in a playoff spot at the halfway point while making it in the last 5 years. So that tells you a lot about how it's very interesting that if you're in a playoff spot at the halfway point, very likely chance you make it. Teams who have 50 plus points at the halfway mark, there were 58 over the past 5 years who had 50 plus points at the halfway mark. 56 of them made the playoffs. Only 2 teams who had 50 plus points at the halfway mark missed the playoffs. That's a 96.6% chance of making the playoffs if you have 50 plus points at the halfway mark. And then at the halfway point, if you're 43 points or lower at the halfway mark in the NHL, over the past 5 years, there have been 65 teams who had 43 points or lower at the halfway mark. Only 6 of those 65 teams made the playoffs. That's a 9% chance to make the playoffs if you have 43 points or lower at the halfway point. However, the Blues, the Habs, and the Senators all did that last year. So very interesting out there. It's not overly common, but it happened 3 times last year. So we'll have to wait and see if it does happen again. But as you can see from these stats, if you're in a playoff spot, pretty good chance you're going to be in a playoff spot come April. If you have 50 plus points, almost a guarantee you're going to make the playoff spots come April. And if you have 43 points or lower at the halfway point, very likely chance you probably do not make the playoffs unless last year you're the Blues, Habs, or Sens. So if you take this into account for this year, teams who have 50 plus points at this current point in time are the Bolts, the Red Wings, the Habs, the Canes, the Flyers, the Avs, Stars, and Wild. So there's a very likely chance that most of those teams will wind up making it. I have really good faith in the 3 top Atlantic teams at this point to all make the playoffs. I think Carolina will easily make the playoffs. The Central teams are almost playoff locks at this point. The only team who I could see being at a 50-plus point mark at the halfway point and still missing might be the Philadelphia Flyers, who I still don't have a ton of faith in. But still, very interesting out there that those teams are most likely going to make the playoffs who have hit 50-plus points. If you look at teams who had 43 points or lower at the halfway mark, that's the Rangers and Jackets, as well as the Sharks, who all have 43 points, Nashville 42, Utah 41, Chicago 39, St. Louis 38, Calgary 40, Vancouver 37, and Winnipeg 35. Those teams all have lower than 43 points at the halfway point. That's 10 teams, but 8 in the Western Conference. So I could see maybe 1 or 2 of them wind up making the playoffs, especially if there was a team out there in the West who ends up leapfrogging one of the teams who's currently in a playoff spot, whether it's a San Jose or Utah. I could see one of those teams, even though they have 43 points or lower, wind up leapfrogging a team and making it into a wild card spot. So very interesting note there, but usually if you have 43 points or lower, you're not making the playoffs. So very interesting note there. So if you look at these standings, in my opinion, I think there's a couple of different ranks for these teams. Like, I think the Avs, the Stars, and the Wild at the halfway point, locks. They're not going to be bumped out of the playoff spot. They have a 13-point advantage on 4th in the Central. Unless one of them has a massive collapse, I do not believe any one of those teams are going to be falling out of the playoff mark. So I think all 3 of those teams will wind up making it. You also have a couple of teams who've made over the past couple of years who are in the playoffs already now, who I think are probably locks in the playoffs, even though they haven't looked the greatest. And that's the Knights, the Oilers, the Canes, and the Bulls. I think those 4 teams are all very likely to make the playoffs, even though they haven't had the strongest of seasons. And then you also have a couple of other teams who have had fantastic seasons but haven't been a true playoff team over the past couple of years, who I think are probably locks in the playoffs at this point in time. That's Detroit, Montreal, and NYI, which will leave 6 open spots. I do think one of at least the Pennsylvania teams will probably wind up falling out of a playoff spot, maybe both. I could also see a Sabres all playoff spot, so I wouldn't say any 3 of those ones are guarantees. I could see Seattle, but I'm leaning more towards them staying in the playoffs at this point in time. While the 2 California teams in LA and Anaheim, I could also see fallout. So usually at the halfway point, only 2 or 3 teams who are in a playoff spot fall out. So I'm thinking maybe 1 or 2 of the Pennsylvania teams, maybe 1 or 2 of the California teams are probably the most likely to fall out of the playoff spot at this current point in time. But very interesting note there. And lastly, going over to my playoff predictions. So if these were the standings, and this is how this thing's finished as of April when the playoffs start, here's who I would have going where. So the playoff matchups would be Colorado, Los Angeles, and Dallas, Minnesota in the Central. It would be Vegas, Anaheim, and Seattle, Edmonton in the Pacific. It would be Carolina, Buffalo, and the Pennsylvania matchup in the Central. And it would be NYI, Tampa, and Detroit, Montreal in the Atlantic matchup. So in the Pacific, you'd have Vegas, Anaheim, and Edmonton, Seattle. Now, this is just a very gut feeling, but I have a very good feeling that because of how terrible the Pacific's been so far, you're going to have a surprise team make it out of the Pacific. I know that Vegas and Edmonton are more of the proven teams, but I have a very good feeling that both those teams aren't going to make it to a conference final. There's going to be one surprise team from the Pacific Division who just goes on a playoff run and makes it to the conference final. So you got Edmonton, Seattle. I'm going to say Seattle wins. I think this is reminiscent of their first playoff series when they played the Colorado Avalanche. It was like, 2 or 3 years ago. They had not as much high-end talent, just like they don't have with the Edmonton Oilers, but they had a more well-rounded team. I think defensively, Kraken have a bit better of a defense. I think in net, Grubauer is like one of the best goaltenders in the entire NHL, and the core's also not done bad. So goaltending-wise, the Kraken have the way better edge. And while I do think that the higher in power on the offensive side does go to Edmonton, Seattle has shown this year they have a more staggered and well-rounded forward group. So I would take Seattle in a 7-game series. I do think I wouldn't be surprised if the Oilers won, but I would take the Seattle Kraken. Then you'd have Vegas and Anaheim. These 2 teams, since the start of December, have been atrocious. I do trust the Knights a little bit more because of the Pacific Division, but I think there's one X factor that will win the Anaheim Ducks the series, and that is goaltending. Hart recently just got injured for the Vegas Golden Knights. Not sure the extent of his injury. We haven't seen Ian Hill since November, so the goaltending problems I think in Vegas are going to cost them in the postseason if Hart and Hill are not be able to be completely 100% healthy. They have a decent blue line, but not the best. And forward group wise, they do have a pretty pretty solid forward group. I just think the Ducks are a younger, faster team, and if they have a solid goaltender net, they will be able to take them down in like 6 games. So you'd have a Ducks-Kraken second round matchup. Then in the Central Division, you'd have Colorado, Los Angeles. Now I know in my last video, I said Colorado would lose in round 1, but I think it depends on the matchups because the way Los Angeles is played, them being a slower team, them not having too much offensive depth, I could easily see Colorado take that team down. I think if there was another matchup, whether it be a team like the Sharks or the Mammoth who snuck into a second wildcard spot and played Colorado, it would be a different story. But I think they could easily handle Los Angeles Kings. I think offensively the Avs are better, defensively the Avs are better, in that the goaltending is comparable, but I just think that the Colorado Avalanche are too much of a better team than the Los Angeles Kings. So I would say Avalanche win in probably 6 games. Then you have the Wild and the Jets. And when I stick with my previous statement from the one I did a couple of weeks ago, I said Stars will play Wild in the first round. I said Wild will win 6 games. Still sticking with that. Stars just came off of a 6-game losing streak. The Wild have looked great since Quinn Hughes came back. So I think that, especially with that defense being a lot better than the Stars defense at this current point in time, I would take the Wild over the Stars. So that would lead to a second round matchup of Wild Avalanche. 2 of the best defenders going at it in the second round. In the Eastern side, you have Detroit, Montreal. Once again, I said these 2 teams would play just a little while ago, who I said was going to make the Stanley Cup playoffs a couple of weeks ago. I said Detroit would win in like a 5 or 6 game series. I'm going to say that again. I think the Red Wings, these 2 teams are very comparable. 2 big differences. One, the Red Wings have a whole bunch of veterans who know what it takes to win. Kopp, Comfort, Kane, DeBrincat. They have a couple of guys who know how to win in the postseason. And 2, Gibson is a whole bunch better of a goaltender than whoever is in net for the Montreal Canadiens, especially with the December he just had. So I would take Gibson and the Red Wings to dethrone the Montreal Canadiens and take them down in 6 games. Then you'd have the Tampa Bay Lightning wind up taking on the New York Islanders. Now the Lightning I think could win most first round matchups. This particular first round matchup is one I think they would rather avoid because I think the Islanders could take down Tampa. They've done so 3 times in the regular season this year. They've all been low scoring games in which the Islanders have outlasted the Bolts. The Islanders, I think at this point in time, have a better goaltender in Sorokin than Vasilevsky. Defensively, very comparable, but I think even though Radish and Moser are playing out of their minds right now, even if they were to get a little bit healthier, the Islanders have the better blue line, and depth-wise, the Islanders are better up front. So I would take the Islanders probably in a 7-game series to take down the Bolts, setting up an Islanders-Red Wings second round matchup. And then you have the Canes and the Sabres. Canes, I do think, would be the better team. Sabres just making the playoffs will be a win in of itself, but I don't think they had the firepower to contend with a healthy Carolina Hurricanes team. So I would take the Carolina Hurricanes probably in like 5 games. And then you have the Pennsylvania matchups. Like I don't know when the last time these 2 played. I think it was 17-18. I might be wrong on that, but it's been a while since we had all Pennsylvania matchup in the playoffs. So this will be very interesting out there. While I do think the Philadelphia Flyers are more likely to make the playoffs, and I do think the Penguins are more likely to fall out of the playoffs at this current point in time. If these 2 teams were to face each other in round 1, I think the Penguins would be more likely to advance. I think the Penguins, especially with still having Crosby, Malkin, and Letang, which spearheaded a Stanley Cup winner back in 16-17, I think they would still be able to have the veteran experience to take down a younger Philadelphia Flyers team, and I still think Stuart Skinner has what it takes to at least win a playoff series. So very interesting out there, but I would take the Pittsburgh Penguins in the Battle of Pennsylvania, probably in 6 games. So that would lead to second round matchup in Carolina and Pittsburgh. So you've got the Kraken taking on the Ducks, the Wild taking on the Avs, the Canes and Pens, and the Islanders and Red Wings. So we'll just go quickly through all of these. Avs and Wild, I said before, I believe in the President's Trophy curse, and on top of that, teams who hit 120 plus points in a season don't usually do good since the turn of the century. So with that in mind, I'm going to say the Avalanche battle in round 2. I think the Wild will be able to get the right number, and the Wild will be able to win in about 6 games. So they'll go back to conference final like I've been saying over the past couple of playoff prediction videos. The Kraken will play the Ducks. I think the Ducks will barely be able to get past the Golden Knights. And I think with the fact that the Kraken are such a well-structured team and the Ducks just don't look good and they have growing pains given the fact that they're one of the younger teams in the NHL, I would say the Kraken take down the Anaheim Ducks probably in a 7-game series. So that would lead to a Kraken Wild conference final. In the Eastern Conference, you'd have Islanders versus Red Wings. Islanders have also had the Red Wings number all regular season long. They have the better goaltender. better. They have definitely a better defense. Forward-wise, they're comparable, but I think the advantages in net and on the blue line would really help the Islanders in this series. And they've also had the Red Wings number all season long. So I would say that the Islanders represent the Atlantic Division and go to the conference final after beating the Red Wings in like a 6 or 7 game series. And then you'd have the Canes taking on the Pittsburgh Penguins. This is where the Penguins' magical run comes, sort of like with Ovechkin and the Caps last year. Had a really solid first round, but then they got taken care of by the Carolina Hurricanes in round 2. I think of a similar thing to happen here. I just think offensively, Canes are a better team. Defensively, Canes are definitely a better team. And in net, if Boosie's playing pretty well, I would definitely take them in net too. So I would say Canes take down the Penguins in the second round. So that would lead to conference finals of Canes Islanders and Kraken Wild. So very interesting note there. Kraken Wild, I do think that the Kraken's magical run here comes to an end. I would love to see the Seattle Kraken in a playoff spot. I think if they were to come out of the Pacific Division, which was the way the Pacific's been playing right now, I could easily see that. If they were to go up against any one of Colorado, Dallas, Minnesota in the conference final, they ain't getting past any of those teams. They don't have the pure talent and completeness that those 3 teams have. Like, I think they could contend with any Pacific Division team. I don't think they could contend with any of those Central Division teams. I would say, well, I'll take that series probably in a 5-game series. Canes and Islanders, once again, another thing is the Canes have had the Islanders number in the postseason the past couple of years. Like, they met in back-to-back seasons, not last year, but I think it was the 2 years prior, and the Canes easily handled the Islanders, even though they had Sorokin in net. I do think that they stack up a little bit better than in years past, but I still think that the Canes will be able to, once again, find a way to take down the New York Islanders, probably in like a 6-game series, which will once again lead to another Canes Wild Stanley Cup final matchup, in which I would say that the Wild win their first ever Stanley Cup. I just think that that defense is probably a little bit better than the Canes defense. I think the goaltending in Minnesota is a little more trustworthy than the Canes goaltending, and offensively they stack up pretty well against each other. So I would say that the Wild currently right now is the standings at the halfway point, would take the Stanley Cup home, their first ever Stanley Cup in franchise history. So definitely, everybody thoughts on all that down in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? If the playoffs were a matchup, as I said, in the halfway point standings, who would you think goes to the Stanley Cup final? Could it be the Canes? Could it be the Wild? Who wins the Stanley Cup final? Could the Kraken make it? Could the Oilers make it again? Do the Islanders make a run? Do the Bolts make a run? Definitely, your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. But that is my thoughts on the standings at the halfway point. So definitely, that's all I'm going to talk for today. We're going to play this video. And if you'd like to subscribe below, thank you for all your support. I would never be able to do it without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for videos coming out in the very near future. Also a blog, talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So definitely check that out. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.